Hi, this is Pat Iyer, and this is Writing to Get Business podcast. Many companies are looking for answers on how they can optimize their processes and be more productive and compete more fully in the market and tackle business challenges. I have with me today Dave Dragon, who is an expert in the area of larger companies dealing with some of those challenges. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Pat. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Let's start by sharing the title of your book so that our listener or our viewer understands the area that you decided to tackle in your book.
Sure. The short version is I Solve Mysteries. That's the name of the book. But then the longer version is The Art and Science of Business Process Optimization and Transformation. So that's a mouthful. But the short version is I Solve Mysteries.
And I know that there are people who think of different kinds of mysteries other than business mysteries. Tell our listener about the mysteries part. What does that mean?
Well, I work on large transformation projects for companies, and typically it has to do with their business processes being broken. And when you go into one of these projects, they may have opinions about what they think is wrong, but 90% of the time they really don't know what's wrong. So when I'm going in to run a project, I'm really trying to understand what is really the root cause of their issue. And that's what the mystery is. So in many times through the work that I do, and I start presenting what we really find as their problem, they're surprised because it's a mystery to them too. So it's a mystery to me walking in, and then it's a mystery to them because they really had no idea what their problem was.
That reminds me, Dave, of when I worked with attorneys. They would come to me and say, this case is about this. And then I would get into the medical records and I would say, no, that case is not about this. It's about that. How do we end up not having an accurate feel for the cause of a problem? What's behind that?
Well, it's actually kind of like what a doctor does with his diagnosis. When you go to a doctor, you have a pain someplace, and you think that's the issue, but that's only the symptom. And it's the same thing with business. When they feel the pain, it's a symptom, but it's not what the root cause of their problem is. So they may feel pain across multiple different parts of the organization, and they think that's where the issue is, but it's actually someplace else. Could be entirely different part of the corporation that's causing the problem, but they feel the pain in a certain area. So I do something very similar to a doctor. I diagnose pain problems, and then I give them what the real issue is, and what the real root cause is.
You're coming in as a consultant, right?
Yes.
And you're not an employee in those situations that we're talking about.
No, I'm coming as a consultant, outside consultant.
How do you get people to open up to you?
Well, that's part of the mystery. So in the book, I talk about multiple roles that I play on a project. The first role is I'm an archaeologist. So I have to look at artifacts. So look at all the documentation they have. And typically when you go into a company, they don't have their current business processes documented. So one of the first things that we have to do is do what we call a current state analysis, and that's documenting their business processes. And through that, I start seeing where their issues are. And I start identifying and understanding some of the cultural issues that they have, because people may be in conflict. So I'm starting to get information back from my analysis. And then I'm kind of an anthropologist is the next thing I do, because what I need to do is understand the company culture and why they behave in a certain way. So I've got the artifacts, I'm looking at their culture, and then from there, we dive down into asking questions. I'm a Six Sigma black belt, and one of the tools that we use is called the 5 whys. So I'll take a particular part of the process and we color code them red, yellow, and green. Red means bad, yellow means, okay, something's not right. Green means it's okay. So we'll dive into the red process steps and hear the symptoms and then ask them why. Why is this process red? Why are you feeling the pain in this particular area? And so now we're starting to do the diagnosis and understanding where their issues are. And that's where they start opening up. So it's basically, it's asking questions. And the 5 whys means that if you ask why 5 times, you're hopefully getting to what the real root cause is. Because again, they're going to give you symptoms, then they're going to give you another level of symptoms. They're going to try to divert the conversation away to what the real problem is. So history has shown in Six Sigma, if you get through the 5 whys, you usually get down to what the true root cause of the issue is. So in a large process, you have the pain right here, and you have upstream processes and downstream processes. Typically, what happens is the upstream process is doing something that filters its way down to the downstream process, and that's where the symptom comes in, and that's where they're feeling pain. So that's the methodology that I've used over the years to really figure out what's going on. And, these big companies they're all cross-sectional, cross-functional. So I may have sales and marketing, I have supply chain, I have manufacturing, I have R&D, I got finance. So everybody kind of intersects at a certain level in these processes. And that's where this methodology that I use comes out. And it's all outlined in the book too. I talk about that in detail.
Can you give an example of what might happen upstream that would affect people downstream?
Sure. So one of the projects I talk about in the book was a large CPG company, and they do something called trade promotion management. And most people are not familiar with it. I never even heard of it before I started the project. And that's where you go into the supermarket and you get to buy buy 2, get 1 free. So this is a very kind of convoluted process that the food manufacturers have and the supermarket chains have. And it's a real logistical and it's a real nightmare. It's really a lot of stuff going on. So this company was feeling a lot of pain in part of the process. And it just lit up the current state process maps in red all over the place. So as we started going in and looking at what was causing it, we ultimately found out that the way they set their prices upstream was causing all this pain downstream in the process with their customers. So what happened was their pricing model that they had was very confusing. People inside the company didn't understand it, and the customers didn't understand it. So that's where a lot of the problems came in. Just as we were working on this project and really getting to this root cause of pricing, when the customers came back to them and said, look, we can't figure out your pricing. Here's what we're going to do. We think we know how much we should pay for this based on our conversations with your salespeople. So that's what we're going to pay. Now, if you think we should pay a different price, that's your problem. So you figure out all of the problems that you have in matching your selling price to whatever, but we know what we think we should pay based on talking to your salespeople. That's what we're going to pay. Sometimes we're going to be under, sometimes we're going to be over. First month that this supermarket chain did this, it was over a mid 5-figure deduction that they took from the company. So over $50,000 because they couldn't reconcile the problems with the selling price.
Mm-hmm.
Now multiply that for a whole year and you're looking over $500,000 if you keep that going. Right. So that started getting people's attention. So it was by chance that when we identified what the root cause was, one of their biggest customers came back and said, we're not playing around with you anymore. So that just kind of solidified what we were telling them.
Did they solve their pricing problem then?
Well, it was going to take over a year. It's nothing. Pricing is not easy to do. So you have to get the not only the sales organization involved, but marketing. So, in consumer pricing, it's all about marketing. And when they do these 2-for-1s, they're competing against some other brand to try to draw them over to yours. So you've got, the sales organization, you got the marketing organization, you got the legal organization, you got the finance organization. So it took over a year to get everybody together to kind of streamline how they were going to do their pricing. So a lot of times these problems are not easy to solve quickly.
No, I was just reading an article a couple of days ago about the problem with returns. That when people are shipping these products back to Amazon, for example, that it costs a phenomenal amount of money to receive something that somebody didn't want. It doesn't get repackaged and sold to somebody else. They often end up in landfills, or the company says, don't bother to return it to us. It's just not worth it to have to process this thing back in the system. Occasionally people have told me that we've accidentally shipped 2 of my books to them. And our typical response is, please find somebody else and give it to them, because by the time they pay the shipping back to us, we can refund them a little bit of money, but I would rather it be in somebody else's hands. And I would think on a large scale, when manufacturing companies who are your target market end up with these kinds of issues, that it's phenomenally wasteful to try to solve some of the problems. And if you're not solving them, then you're ending up wasting even more money. So I would think that your skills would be very valuable as a consultant to help people with those red zone issues that they're dealing with.
Yeah, I worked on a project where the company was a CPG company and they were just getting into e-commerce. They didn't really understand all the ins and outs of it. And we put a performance management model together so they could keep track of all the different things in their business. And one of the things we put in was a performance management KPI around how you manage returns. And it had to do with not only the logistical part, but also the customer satisfaction part, because Zappos was one of the first ones to come out with these free returns. And then now it's become kind of commonplace. And the CFO wasn't thinking about not only the cost, but also the marketing and social network commentary that happens. So we needed to make sure that the KPI had kind of multiple streams that we were looking at, so they could get a real picture of how they needed to manage their returns. Because if you get one bad review out on social media, I mean, it moves fast. So you got to be careful in today's world on how you treat your customers, because they can, do damage very quickly to your reputation. So that was and she was like surprised, like, wow, I never even thought about a KPI about returns.
Yeah, and it's very difficult for a company to get rid of a bad return too. I mean, a bad review.
Right.
On social media.
Exactly.
Well, you were working as a consultant, working with these companies. Tell our listener or our viewer, what made you decide that you wanted to write a book about your experiences?
Well, it's an interesting story. I've worked on a lot of these projects over the years, and I was working on some projects in 2018, and I was getting really frustrated in talking with the team I was working with. And I said, why as consultants do we make these same mistakes over and over and over again in not telling these companies we're going to work with that this is the emotional roller coaster you need to expect to go through when we're solving your mysteries. And one of the things that I talk about in the book is the 5 stages of grief. So think about, I'm doing a project and I'm finding something that, again, they don't know about. And I have to go to the steering committee and tell them, okay, this is what your real problem is. So first thing happens in the 5 stage of grief is denial. no, that's not right. Why did we even hire you? That's dumb because people don't want to hear the truth. And then they get in anger. So now they get angry at you and they vent at you. And then they said, again, why did we even hire you? You're incompetent. So then you need a real strong team that you're working with at the client to be able to support the commentary. And that's why we do the artifacts. So then they get in negotiations. It's not as bad as you think it is. Then it's like, well, we keep showing them the artifacts and they come to the conclusion it's maybe even worse than they thought. So now they get depressed. So this is a typical cycle that we go through in these projects. And that year in 2018, I'd worked on 3 different projects and, we were not preparing the organization and it bogs the process down as they go through it. So I was bitching and moaning to some of the people I was working with. And one of the guys said, why don't you stop bitching and moaning and write a book? I'm like,
put your money where your mouth is, Dave.
Put your money where your mouth is. I'm like, I never thought about writing a book. And then I thought about it and I'm like, at this stage in my career, if I can help, mid-career and early career professionals to understand this better, these projects were going to go a lot smoother. So I started test marking some of the concepts with these folks that I was working with. And they're like, yeah, that's basically what we should be telling them up front. When we start a project, tell them, look, you're going to go through this emotional roller coaster and this is why it's going to happen. So then I incorporated that into the thought process for the book. So I said, I'm going to take the first 3 months of 2019 and write this book. So every day I sat down and I had a structure already in my mind and I just started writing and I started writing. And then I'd look at it and I'd say, hey, man, I don't even understand what you're saying. How can somebody else understand? So did a bunch of rewrites. And then during that same time, I reached out to a couple of friends that I knew from the advertising area. And I said, do you know anybody that's a good publisher that I could talk to? So they gave me a couple of names and it really came down to one publisher. And that's how I started the process of writing the book. Basically, I was bitching and moaning and somebody told me, put up or shut up. Mm-hmm. So I put up.
And you've shared with us a couple of models, you as the architect, you as the anthropologist, you as the problem solver after the diagnosis stage.
Yeah, so you're the archaeologist, the anthropologist, the detective. Now, this is where we're solving the mystery.
Okay.
We're the detective. Then we're the strategist.
Uh-huh.
I need to be able to come up with a strategy to move them from here to there. So now I'm a strategist. So then now the hard work starts. And you would think the stuff I was just talking about is the hard work. That's not the hard work. The hard work is being the psychologist. Because now we have to present this information to the organization and explain to them, this is what we're going to do. And people's first reaction to change is, I'm not changing. And we see it at the steering committee at first because they don't want to change. And now we've got to translate that to the organization as we build these future state business processes and start explaining to the organization why we have to change. There's a rule in change management that says 20% of the people in the organization will be for you, 20% of the people in the organization are going to be against you. In the middle, 60% are undecided. So as a psychologist, my job is to convince more than 50% of the 60% that this is a good thing. And I don't do it myself. We do it with the organization that we're working with because it's their team that they have to get to adopt the change.
Mm-hmm.
So then we're the psychologists. And then sometimes, and you can imagine, I'm a psychiatrist because people get crazy. People's jobs are on the line. You show somebody something and they go through the 5 stages of grief. And when they're in anger, I mean, they're really in anger. Now, it doesn't happen on every project that I have to be the psychiatrist, but a lot of times I'm going to deal with one or two crazy people on the project. And because I work with internal teams at the company and we'll have our own project team as consultants, sometimes the crazy person is on my team and I have to be able to deal with that crazy person. And then finally, how does this all come together? So I'm a conductor, I'm a maestro, I'm leading an orchestra of people in solving mysteries. So that kind of brings everything together. I've got these people I'm working with, these people I'm working with, all these different processes we're analyzing. So I have to orchestrate the team and make sure we continue to move forward in the project and ultimately solve what the problem is and then give them a corrective action plan. So there's all these different hats. And that's why I thought it was important for somebody who's going to be interested in this for their career. You got to realize these are all the different hats that you have to wear when you do a large optimization and transformation project.
Well, you just helped me understand something that happened to me about 30 years ago when a hospital hired me to come in and identify some risk management problems in their facility. And I guess about 3 visits into it, they were all angry with me because I was pointing out problems that they didn't want to acknowledge. Right. And I was ready to go in for the 4th visit when I opened up my mail as I was loading up my car to drive to this facility. And the VP of nursing told me that my services were no longer required. And I was devastated.
Oh, yeah.
And I called her up and, you know, she didn't want to talk about it. There were other people with her. She wasn't being clear. I had to reflect on it later and think about what really happened. And I think I took them from the denial to the anger stage. And in the anger stage, they said, we don't want to work with Pat anymore. Yeah, now I'm beginning to feel maybe it wasn't just me personally, but maybe it was I stirred up too many hornets there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It had nothing to do with you. No, if you were identifying all those problems, they were in the anger stage and they were making you the problem, right? So think about, I'm working with a large corporation and we have this steering committee and I've come with the team, one of the members of the team that we've solved the mystery. And now we've got to present it to the steering committee for the first time, right? So one of the things that we have to do is have the client team start priming some of the people on the steering committee about what's going on. Now, it may be that I got a senior vice president and we're priming him and he's the one that causes the problem. He created this problem over the last 5 years with some of the things that he did to the organization or she did to the organization. Now I got to go into the steering committee and basically say to the senior vice president, your baby's ugly and you were the cause of it. You imagine, how that goes down, just like with you, right? Denial, angry, you're the bad guy. And it's like, well, I'm here to help you. You got to decide. You want to fix your company or not? And basically the hospital you were working with, they decided they didn't want to fix their problems. Mm-hmm. At least at that time.
Yes. Yeah. And I don't know what happened after. I heard later that the hospital got an award for best practices in healthcare. And I suspect that it had to happen after this person who was in charge left. Somebody else came in with a different perspective and was ready to tackle those problems that they only thought they wanted to tackle when I was trying to work with them.
Right, right. And, sometimes what happens is they just want you to come in and diagnose the problem. They don't want you to help them fix it. So that happens too. As consultants, it's kind of a fine line that we run by giving them what they need to know versus everything they need to know. Because if we want to get follow-up business, we have to just give them enough where they just can't run with it on themselves if you want follow-up business. Sometimes you run a project is like you don't want to be there after you figure out what's wrong. So just give them as much as they need and you guys go ahead and figure it out yourself. So sometimes you have to fire clients, unfortunately.
And I think what you do, Dave, and you're pointing out is being a consultant is incredibly complex when you talk about the stages and the processes of helping companies. There's so many factors that interplay how a company functions, the personalities, the processes, the hidden agendas, the jockeying for power, the awareness of what the market is requiring. It's not for the faint of heart to be running a large corporation.
What I say, it's not for the faint of heart. I use that exact phrase in the book. This is not for the faint of heart. What happens is, in companies, you have different departments and there are silos. And, there's a dysfunctional relationship many times with the different silos because the company may have its own culture, but each silo has its own culture. And those cultures collide in many cases. So they don't like to talk to each other. And that is the cause of a lot of the issues that go on. Each silo has its own culture. That's part of what I need to figure out is what is that silo's culture? So I use a model that came out of the University of Michigan with 4 different cultures. I've kind of weaned it down to that. And then I got to figure out not how to tear down silos, but how to integrate silos.
Mhm.
That's a big part of what we do because a lot of these processes are cross-functional across many departments. So we got to make sure we can coordinate the activities between these departments and get them working together and getting their silos to integrate versus, and I hate the word tear down silos. People use that all the time and I correct them. We don't want to tear down silos. It's got a negative concept. You want to integrate silos and getting people to work together. And that's not always easy.
If you tear down somebody's silo, then you may become the enemy. They may turn on you and say, why should we listen to Dave? He's just challenging us. He wants to break us apart. And you become the bad guy for crystallizing their frustrations with what you're trying to do to help them.
In many cases, consultants are labeled the bad guy because we tell people what they don't want to hear. That's what they hire us for. They think they want to hear the truth, but in many cases they don't. So we do turn into the bad guy.
Mm.
Yeah. That sometimes they can't deal with what the truth is. It's too overwhelming for them.
Well, back to your book in the remaining couple of minutes. You wrote the book, you spent 3 months, and then were you happy with it? Did you end up having to rewrite any portions of it? How did that process go?
Well, at that point, I had identified the publisher that I wanted to use. So I sent them the first part of the manuscript. And so now I started a new lingo terminology that I didn't use, right? I got a manuscript now. So I sent them the first part of the manuscript. They read it and they said, yeah, this could be real interesting for us. So, finish up writing the book. And I did multiple rewrites. Just to kind of clarify everything. And then I sent them the manuscript and they sent it to 2 of their editors. And 2 editors went through it and did a great job in identifying things. And then we got together afterwards and had a couple of conference calls with the editors and we went chapter by chapter. And it's like, okay, what are you trying to say here? I kind of understand it, but you can word it a little bit differently. So they helped me with some of the wording that I could do. And then it was like, you don't need to put this in the book right now. That probably is not a good thing to have in the book. So let's take this out of the book. So we pared it down into something that was more manageable. I think there's a 45,000 to 65,000 range for business books. That's the optimum word count. So they helped me kind of pare that down into the 45, 65,000 range. And then the fun part was working with their designers for the cover. So, they the designers for the cover read the outline of the book and everything, and then they came back with multiple versions of the cover. And then we started talking about it, and we kind of got the cover design done. So that was kind of the fun, creative part of it.
Yes. Excellent. So is there another book in you, Dave, do you think?
Well, I wrote another book in 2019 as kind of a personal memoir, but I haven't published it yet. A lot of people do those. So maybe sometime in the future, I'll publish it. But no business book right now. I think I let it all out on that one. I solve mysteries.
Excellent. Well,
It's
let's
30 years of 30 years of learning and knowledge. There's a lot in there.
And to develop that level of expertise meant that you've worked with a lot of people and looked at a lot of problems and helped people with solving those problems and those mysteries as to what was causing those problems.
Yeah, it's an accumulation of all the different things that I've done in my career. I have had a very diverse career. I'm an accountant by education, but I got into supply chain and sales and outsourcing and technology and working on these projects both internally at the companies I was working for and then with clients. So it's really kind of an accumulation of 30 years of wisdom. And I didn't come up with that. Somebody who read the book said, wow, this is a book of wisdom. I'm like, oh, I like that. That's pretty cool. I like it. It's a book of wisdom.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's what it ultimately gets to. It's a book of wisdom.
And let's give the title again for our listener or our person who's watching this on our YouTube channel.
So the short title is I Solve Mysteries. It's on Amazon in both print and digital. The longer version is I Solve Mysteries, the Art and Science of Business Process Optimization and Transformation.
Very nice, Dave. All right, so we let people know where to get your book. What would be the best way for people to reach you if they wish to?
Probably the best way to reach me is on LinkedIn. That's where I have most of my business conversations. So if you find the book and you read it, and you have some questions, you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Dave. We've been talking to Dave Dragon, Dragon, who has written his business book called I Solve Mysteries. He shared with us a process of a role of a consultant working with an organization to help them identify and resolve issues that are affecting their productivity and performance as a company based on his years of experience as a consultant, an external consultant coming into a company who's having some pain and a lot of big red areas. As you've described your color coding system, those red areas with the pain are the ones that affect performance, optimization, and holding companies back from being the best that they can be in service of their customers and their particular market. Be sure to return to Writing to Get Business podcast for future shows. And if you go on my website of patiyer.com, PATIYER.com, you have the opportunity to get some of our free reports or to request the transcripts of these podcasts so that you can go back and refer to them in the future. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Pat.
This is Pat Iyer with Writing to Get Business. I have with me Amy Wilson, who is the author of a new book that just came out this week called Empathy for Change. Amy, can you tell our listener what are some of the topics that we covered in our podcast?
Yeah, so we talked first of all about what does empathy and change, what's that intersection, what's that Venn diagram that we have there? What do we need to do to have a dialogue around empathy and change? We talked about my past experience, why I wrote the book, and why it's important for today. And as we got into a little bit more about what do I hope to have change and do in the world now that we're going into it, now that we're having a new world in 2021.
Well, thank you, Amy. Be sure to pick up a copy of Amy's book, Empathy for Change, and listen to her podcast on our audio channels or watch her show on our Pat Iyer YouTube channel. You will get some insights about governmental processes, about the different types of empathy, about what is an empath versus a highly sensitive person, and how all of those factors can combine in terms of helping to make change in a way that respects people's needs and exhibits empathy. Thank you.